The silica dust settled wrong in the northwest quadrant. I had noticed it on the third day and said nothing, because the Rhevari do not file observations, they file measurements. 6 weeks later, 11 survey teams had covered the HFY flats in a grid so tight you could have run a string between every stake and called it a net. 900 individual scan passes, deep resonance sonar, thermal gradient array, spectrographic bore sampling. 2 kinds of magnetometry I did not have names for yet. Every instrument the Rhevari compact carried, calibrated and logged and cross-referenced, and every single one of them had returned the same reading across 4,200 square kilometers of pale red mineral flat. Null. No subsurface moisture, no pressure differential, no anomaly of any kind at any depth down to 60 meters. The colony would fold without water. The Rhevari knew it. They had 3 more weeks of survey authority before the compact recalled the equipment and filed a terminal assessment. And a terminal assessment on a colony-grade world meant the resettlement board would pull the authorization and move the families elsewhere. 47,000 people. A 3-week clock. 900 scans in the file and not a single drop confirmed. I was the only member of the survey team who had not yet filed a null report. That was not because I had found anything. It was because I had not yet surveyed the northwest quadrant, and I was going to survey it tomorrow, and senior surveyor HFY had stopped mentioning this to me sometime around the end of the 4th week. The Rhevari are not unkind. They had simply stopped expecting anything from a mammal who spent the evenings sitting outside the equipment tent looking at the way dust moved. The wire had been in my kit since Harlan gave it to me on a dry August morning in eastern Oregon when I was 22. I had been hired to survey well sites on his land, meaning I showed up with a ground-penetrating radar unit and a laptop, and Harlan watched me for an hour and then asked, politely, whether I wanted to see how it was actually done. He was 71. His hands were the size of shovels and he had been finding water on that plateau since before I was born. He bent the wire himself from a length of stripped 18-gauge electrical cable, salvaged from a rewiring job on the barn. 2 tines, each 22 centimeters, forked at a 30-degree angle. He held it at the joint with his thumbs down and his arms loose at the elbows, and he walked a slow grid across his south pasture, and I watched the wire do nothing for 20 minutes, and then it pivoted, smoothly, without hesitation, a 40-degree drop at the fork, and he stopped walking, and pushed a stake into the ground and said, 30 feet, give or take. They drilled 31 feet and hit it. I asked him how it worked. He said he didn't know. He said the wire didn't find the water. His body found the water, and the wire just showed him which way his hands were already moving. He said you had to be quiet enough to feel it, and most people weren't. Then he handed me the wire, and I have carried it clipped inside my left kit pocket ever since, and I have used it 11 times on 4 planets, and it has been right 9 of those 11 times, and I have never once been able to explain which 2 it got wrong. I did not tell the Rhevari I had it. The Rhevari file measurements. The northwest quadrant in the early morning was the same as every other part of the HFY flats. Pale red mineral aggregate, fine silica overburden, binary star white light arriving from 2 directions at once and making shadows that went nowhere useful. The wind was low. The dust was doing the thing I had watched it do for 6 weeks, settling in a faint convective drift along the ground, moving from east to west except in a narrow strip of the northwest sector where it seemed to hesitate, to slow, to deposit itself in slightly heavier concentrations along a line I could only see by getting low and looking sideways across the flat. I am not a mystic. I want to be clear about that. I have a geology degree and 18 years of fieldwork and a laptop full of radar returns. What I know is that convective ground drift in an arid mineral flat responds to subsurface temperature differentials, and temperature differentials in a dry basin can indicate pressure variation, and pressure variation at depth can indicate a number of things, one of which is water. I know that my body has spent 18 years reading ground-level drift patterns in dry country, and that pattern recognition accumulated in a nervous system over 18 years of practice is a real thing, and that the wire is a way of making that pattern recognition visible to my hands before my brain has finished processing it. That is the explanation I give myself. I do not know if it is correct. I took the wire from my kit and held it at the fork, thumbs down, arms loose. I walked east to west across the slow drift line. The binary light came in flat and white from both sides, and my shadow went in 2 directions. The silica dust was fine enough that I could feel it on my lips. At the 162nd step, the wire pivoted. 40 degrees at the fork, smooth and without hesitation, and my hands had not moved. I stopped walking. I pushed a stake into the ground. I stood there for a moment in the flat binary light with the wire still holding its angle, and the silica dust drifting past my boots. And I thought about Harlan standing in his south pasture with the same wire in his hands, and the same expression on his face, which was not triumph, and was not wonder, but was something closer to the face a person makes when they hear their name called from across a crowded room, and turn toward it before they have consciously decided to. I walked back to the equipment tent and told Teshvaroth that I had flagged a point in the northwest quadrant and would recommend a bore sample at 34 meters. She looked at me for a moment. She asked what instrument reading I had used. I said, intuition. The Rhevari do not have a word for intuition that maps cleanly onto the concept. What they have is a word that translates approximately as embodied hypothesis, a reading taken from an organism's accumulated error history rather than from a calibrated instrument, and it carries, in Rhevari practice, roughly the same epistemic weight as a clerical error. Teshvaroth wrote it down. She wrote it down because the Rhevari write everything down, including things they expect to disprove. They spent 4 hours running every instrument they had over the flagged point. I sat outside the equipment tent and watched the dust. The deep resonance sonar found a pressure anomaly at 31 meters on the second pass. The bore sample confirmed a water-bearing stratum at 34 meters and change. The flow rate, once they had opened the test bore, was sufficient to support the colony's baseline needs for 6 months, while permanent infrastructure was established. Teshvaroth filed the discovery under my survey number and opened a concurrent protocol inquiry on the method, which she labeled embodied hypothesis, organic, human, unverified instrument source. She came to the equipment tent afterward and asked if she could examine the wire. I unclipped it and laid it on the table. It is 22 centimeters tine to tine, bare copper, 18 gauge, with a fork bent at 30 degrees by the hands of a man named Harlan in eastern Oregon, 12 years before I ever left Earth's atmosphere. The insulation has been stripped. The tines are slightly oxidized at the tips. One of them has a small kink about 7 centimeters from the end where I dropped it on a rock outcrop on the third survey I ever used it for. It is worth, materially, approximately nothing. Teshvaroth examined it for a long time. She ran a handheld spectrometer over both tines. She documented its dimensions and photographed it from 6 angles. She asked me what calibration standard it was manufactured to. I said it wasn't manufactured. I said an old man bent it from electrical cable on a dry morning in Oregon. She asked what the instrument's operating principle was. I said I didn't know. She wrote all of this down. She wrote it down carefully, in the same precise notation she used for the bore sample returns and the flow rate calculations and the spectrographic data that had told her, 900 times, that there was nothing here. Then she handed the wire back to me, without saying anything else. I clipped it back inside my left kit pocket. The colony got its water. The 47,000 people did not have to go elsewhere. Somewhere in the Rhevari Compacts archive there is now a protocol inquiry file classified under embodied hypothesis, organic, human, unverified instrument source, and as far as I know it is still open. They have not been able to close it, because closing a protocol inquiry requires a filed explanation of operating principle, and I have never been able to give them one. Neither could Harlan. He just knew where to walk.